So technically, we can help support companies at all sizes, really, even like early stage startups. I think where we have seen our tool be the most valuable is in the post revenue, right around the scaling phase. So post Series A, right around like when they're considering hiring their first in house finance team or maybe scaling their finance team. That's where we can come in and really, really drive a lot of value, cutting down hours that your finance team currently spends so that they can kind of, upscale to more value add products. And then same thing with transaction volume, like to the point where like we're potentially working with a client where they're kind of scaling their sales volume. We can kind of come in and really, instead of like you growing your headcount, we can also incorporate mesh into your workflows to hopefully kind of keep that flat while enabling growth on the top line.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted, thrilled, in fact, to have Erin Kim, the co-founder and CEO of Mesh, a company building fully agentic AI-powered finance team for tomorrow, starting with bookkeeping automation. She has a deep background in product finance, AI-driven automation, having previously led key initiatives at Carta and started her career in investment banking at Barclays. Today, we're thrilled to dive into the future of AI in finance and her journey as a founder. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's start with you. Let's start at the beginning. How did you get into finance and start working at Carta? And then we'll get into Mesh as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned this earlier, but I started my career in investment banking, specifically covering the industrial sector. And I think something that I kept gravitating towards were ways to essentially automate myself out of my job. And that led me to strategic finance and being the second finance hire at Carta. So kind of saw the company go from various different rounds of fundraising and help with that. Of course, providing kind of exec financial insights and whatnot every month, but also quarterly. And then once again, I think that gravitated towards the product side of things. How can I actually help the strategic finance function operate at scale as we continue growing as a company? And then eventually made the full switch into the product team, specifically on the fund accounting side of the business at Carta.
As a VC, I've seen a lot of the fund accounting up close and personal and multiple different platforms and LP in a fund. And a lot of it's just super repetitive things.
Totally, totally. I was just gonna say that it's been a lot of fun, just kind of unpacking to your point, like a lot of the like maybe repetitive and potentially mundane aspects of fund accounting at Carta.
And then what was it about that experience that sort of led to the founding of Mesh?
Yeah. So I think something that, first of all, my co-founder Nandini and I met at Carta doing fund accounting automation. So that was, of course, like one of the critical components of starting Mesh. And then the second thing that we had a lot of fun doing at Carta was how do you actually unpack this super complicated domain that's typically filled with various different types of workflows. So in a given fund, you're always calling capital. So you're doing capital calls, you're doing distributions on a regular-ish cadence, you're doing financial reporting. And what we essentially spent the last 4 years on was actually turning each one of those recurring workflows into automated workflows into the Carta's general ledger. So taking a lot of those foundational aspects, we're now doing that for companies at Mesh. And yeah, I think that's kind of been the foundation of how we started the company in the first place.
That's amazing. And what made you guys apply to YC? Was it just an idea on a napkin or how far along was it?
It was an idea on a notebook, I would say. I specifically go for this like anecdote brand notebook. It's like a blank page and kind of just helps me one come up with designs, but also like think through problem sets. And I convinced Sandini to essentially, take a chance and apply, and thankfully it all worked out. So
Yeah, I love that. And you guys worked together for years, and so that was probably a pretty easy transition.
yeah, yeah, I think that has been a huge foundation to starting this company, but also like the highs and lows in the early stages. I think has been really helpful to have that foundation.
So what does it mean to build an agentic AI finance team? What is the vision behind Mesh?
Yeah, so we're starting with the cash reconciliation agent. So oftentimes, whether or not you're a smaller company to a larger enterprise corporation, every single month you're pretty much taking your transactions from across all your bank accounts, and then also then turning that into journals in your general ledger. So that could be in QuickBooks or Zero and whatnot. So that's kind of where we're starting with the bookkeeping aspects of things. And then eventually our goal is to spin up agents that help with payroll reconciliation, things like invoicing reconciliation, billing reconciliation. And eventually, when you actually do have those building blocks, you have a full agentic finance team. And that's kind of where our 10x vision is headed towards.
Do you think it's going to be kind of like history repeating itself? You know, when we came out of the '90s, you had accounting software. You know, probably, and I don't know the history of accounting software, but you had the cloud, right? That came out, and now everything's delivered over the cloud, and so it allowed for new entrants like Zero you mentioned, right? versus QuickBooks. Do you feel like this agentic wave coming in is sort of allowing for new platforms like Mesh to, eventually overtake the existing incumbents?
I hope so. I do think that it's really interesting because things that like could not be done before when it comes to actually like taking actions across various tooling is now becoming possible with the way we build agent. I think that's kind of course, like a critical component to how we've been building an agent that takes data from QuickBooks and takes data from Plaid without necessarily having to be the source of record. I think that's kind of been the fundamental shift in building, but also thinking about problems these days.
So you guys have been gaining traction pretty quickly. What's driving demand and how are customers using it?
I think one part of the driving demand is, of course, like the hype around AI and just kind of the interest on how to actually incorporate that into their day to day workflows. But the other part is the actual pain points when it comes to reconciliation. So a lot of our customers come to us already with the pain point of, hey, I want to, automate this aspect that I have to do in order to essentially gain my insights around revenue and expenses and burn and whatnot. So the sales cycle has been pretty short, especially in the SMB segment where they're kind of needing help, but not able to necessarily hire outsource this task, but also don't have time to do it all in house either.
Yeah. So how do you solve that challenge of trusting the AI and financial ops, right? We're all familiar with Gen AI hallucinating. I think it's getting better over time.
Yeah.
I notice less hallucinations, but when you have something like accounting and finance, you have to be exact. So how do you
Yeah.
ensure that there's no errors?
I think it's pretty much a mix of AI in terms of like AI is really good at understanding like the command intent of what you're trying to do. So we basically have like a cursor like experience right now. On the left side is all of your transactions being classified the first pass at your by AI. And then of course when it's done, just like a good, I guess, finance analyst would, we ping you, whoever the point of contact might be at the company. And then they are invited into our platform to essentially take a final review, being like, hey, this is good to go, this is not good to go. And every single time there's an edit, we also essentially save that into our memory so that the next month around, we won't make the same mistake again, or we won't, classify something that you told us to classify otherwise. And then on the right side, kind of similar how engineers use cursor and the kind of copilot tools, you also have a chat experience. So think about like slacking with another analyst on your team or a finance person on your team. You're able to ask questions like, hey, like, where is this delta coming from? I see my bank balance coming at like $1,000, but my general ledger says 12,000. So can you help me essentially unpack this $1,000 delta? And then we can kind of help from that aspect as well.
Interesting. So that's a process called reconciliation, if I remember. At the end, you're closing the books. This is the first week of the following month, and you're kind of trying to close the books for last month, last quarter. With Mesh, you can do that much quicker. You
Yeah,
can basically go in and identify where are the gaps.
exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. AI powered bookkeeping automation can have gaps. What part of finance still requires that human oversight? You mentioned sort of the, hey, we'll do it for you. And then you still need to review it. And there's a human in the loop that makes the
hmm
AI get better month after month. But what do you think will never be fully automated? Or is that even a reality? Or will it be fully automated?
I think that is TBD, to be honest. I think a lot of the recurring work is able to be automated today. I think what is still remaining to be automated is actually like the generative aspects of accounting. So, what I mean by that is like generating new chart of accounts, new categories to essentially help you with taxes or help you gain like advantages with taxes and whatnot. That's kind of like, I would say, the creative aspects
Yeah. More
of
scenario planning of finance. Like,
exactly.
what happens if we take a loan out? What does that change our degrees of financial leverage and our operating model?
Totally. Yeah.
And things like that. Now it takes a human to sort of look at the trade-offs. The AI can probably suggest some things, and
Yeah.
it's more of those imaginative, on the edge finance stuff that they teach you in the 400 level courses
Yeah.
or graduate level courses, like deep into your finance degree.
Yeah, totally. But like to your point though, if trained properly and trained once, right? Like as long as the data exists or the precedent exists, I think the question does remain, can AI actually start doing the same thing that a human is able to do? So I think it really comes down to the memory, the recall, and continuous learning, and of course evals to actually make sure that the AI is living up to your standards is going to be critical.
Yeah. Why do you think it's the right time for something like this? Obviously, you have large language models, but you had, 5 or 10 years ago, you had some pretty decent NLP kind of tools that
Mhm.
could You had like Expensify and companies like that. Like you had ability to OCR and reconcile transactions. What's the big unlock with large language models is basically what I'm asking there.
I think that the ability to actually have like that back and forth conversation is really what separates a workflow traditionally and an agent. So, like, I was actually having this conversation with my co-founder Nandini yesterday. What technically requires a workflow versus an agent? And she actually has an article coming out in a blog that we're starting, which we're happy to share. But she kind of like broke it down in the sense that like technically most things to your point can be done like fetching a bank balance or fetching like a specific report from using a workflow. But I think where AI unlocks is kind of like this back and forth like conversational aspect that previously was just like not doable in a strictly rule based workflow. I think is where the unlock happens. How can
Yeah.
you actually mimic that interaction layer is where we're really seeing a lot of advancements with.
Yeah, what's interesting about this wave of innovation or this platform shift is, SaaS, AI is eating SaaS, obviously. It's eating software, but I've been trying to formulate this. It's like LaaS or WAS. It's like work as a service, right?
Yeah,
Whereas before I would sell
service.
you a tool.
Yeah,
I'd sell you a tool and you go use the tool to get your job done, right? So you were doing this on, like an actual ledger. That's where the name comes from. I was writing down entries in like a ledger. So now it's a virtual ledger in the browser and you just do the same thing, but it's just on the screen.
mhm,
And now you're kind of like, okay, well, there's this thing that you need to get done, some task or work. And I'm going to sell you a platform that just helps you get the work done.
yeah,
That like enables you to like have a platform to do the work on, but this does the work for you and then checks
totally.
back in with you as if it's your assistant.
Yeah, that's exactly kind of, what we're envisioning, starting with reconciliation and, like, kind of, like, taking one by one down the road.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And everything's becoming, you guys still design, in this new paradigm, are you guys still designing SaaS interfaces that are kind of rigid and you kind of bubble it up? Or you just describe this like kind of the sidebar, like cursor? Do you feel like it's sort of like another interface that sits on top of other interfaces? Or is it kind of all of the above? It's the sidebar, it's the
Yeah.
interface on top of an interface, it's the chat like interface where it kind of spins up things on the fly. Now, before we continue, a quick word about an incredible resource for startup founders. This episode of the Ignite podcast is brought to you by Build, spelled BYLDD. So, what is Build? Well, they specialize with early stage startups, especially non technical founders and teams, helping you build and launch scalable revenue generating software fast and affordably. Most startups can't afford to drop 100K on some big design engineering agency. Freelancers are risky, inconsistent, and full of project management headaches. For 10K in about a month, they can turn your validated idea into a real market ready product. It's built for scalability. Past clients have been accepted in the YC, Y Combinator, very impressive, received backing from Google, and raised multi million-dollar rounds. And there's an exclusive offer for Ignite listeners. Get a free UI UX design sprint that's 3 to 4 weeks, a deep dive into your product experience delivered completely free. This is normally a $10,000 plus service. So head to byldd.com, connect with Ayush and team, mention the Ignite podcast. Let's get back to it.
It's a really interesting question, right? I think for right now, there's like a design for now and then design for like maybe even a year or 2 from now. I think right now we're still in the trust building phase. Like even one of the questions that you asked earlier, like how do you know when to loop the human in and like what will the human be checking? Like I almost think of it and remind myself like what would I want to check over if I hired a real human finance analyst? And that's kind of like the UI that we go with today to essentially prove to you, Brian, if you're our client, hey, this is the work that I as the agent did based on the information you gave us and the clues you gave us. Does it work well? And like, do you want to ask me follow up questions? So that's kind of where the chat versus like the reconciliation UI comes in today. I think in a year from now or 2 years from now, you trained the agent, okay, Mesh, and you trust the work that we're doing. How infrequently do you now have to log in? And what does that UI look like? Maybe it's just a comms layer at that point where we just kind of give you a weekly update via like a report or like an email, a summary. So that's kind of how I see
Yeah,
the
it's almost
UI.
like interfaces are being built on the fly now. And you start to see this right now in like 4.0 or Sonnet and other things that you use where they'll just like, oh, okay, we'll just spin up this table for you to
Mhm.
understand the data. Because SaaS fundamentally is just a bunch of tables,
Yeah.
with APIs and an interface for those tables, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Like it's laid out. It's basically a table laid out in a different way. And so these large language models can just do that. It's just a ledger sitting in some table somewhere
Totally.
and we're reconciling it or trying to understand it or close it out. And I'll just
Mapping
spin
it.
up that little accounting interface for you to kind of check things on.
Yeah.
on the
Exactly.
fly. And so maybe in the future, there is no like SaaS, QuickBooks. I'm going to log into this clunky, last gen 10, 15-year-old software that I'm sure they've reskinned the cat or whatever. If I'm a listener out there interested in using Mesh, like what kind of questions should I be asking myself if I'm a good fit for Mesh to try you guys out? Is there a particular size, revenue, size of accounting department, things like that?
So technically, we can help support companies at all sizes, really, even like early stage startups. I think where we have seen our tool be the most valuable is in the post revenue, right around the scaling phase. So post Series A, right around like when they're considering hiring their first in house finance team or maybe scaling their finance team. That's where we can come in and really, really drive a lot of value, cutting down hours that your finance team currently spends so that they can kind of, upscale to more value add products. And then same thing with transaction volume, like to the point where like we're potentially working with a client where they're kind of scaling their sales volume. We can kind of come in and really, instead of like you growing your headcount, we can also incorporate Mesh into your workflows to hopefully kind of keep that flat while enabling growth on the top line.
So it sounds like, scaling Series A companies, anything above that. What about other bookkeeping, accounting agencies? Have you seen any traction there?
In terms of like us selling to accounting firms.
Yeah.
Not yet. I think that's gonna be an interesting partnership angle, less so than like a customer angle,
Mm.
where we can kind of partner with them to roll out to their respective clients. But yeah, I think the exact partnership like structure is still kind of being figured out there. So just kind of keeping them as, acquaintances and friends for now.
Yeah. So YC Winter 25, how was your YC experience and what was the biggest unlock going through it?
It's a great question. I think the biggest unlock is the community that you gain. Well, like it's almost like going to like a college equivalent in like a short amount of time where you're exposed to so many different ideas and so many different cool people. And I think that has been the biggest unlock when it comes to customer acquisition, but also just the amount of learnings that you gain, everything from fundraising to actually like scaling a company. So
How
that's
do you go out and get demo meetings with customers right now? Like what's that look like for you?
So, actually, so far, it's been a lot of inbound. I think we've gotten really lucky in that sense, where through LinkedIn and Product Hunt and even like word of mouth, we've gotten introduced to a lot of companies. And at this point, we're actually like now more so pattern matching. Like, what vertical can we actually take the lead in, to begin with, and then continue kind of verticalizing and expanding to other industries out there. So,
Yeah, I think that's smart. What's been a surprising insight about selling AI-driven finance tools to businesses?
it's a hard question. How much interest there is in AI, but also the amount of skepticism at the same time. So it's almost like a dual approach where, like going back to the UI standpoint, like there's a huge amount of trust building upfront that we have to do to essentially prove ourselves, prove our accuracy. But then the interest is also there. So can we actually keep that momentum up and then fully convert them into
A little
AI?
cognitive dissonance there,
Yeah,
right? Because they're like, "Ooh, this is exciting, but wait, can I trust it?"
exactly.
So what's the long-term vision as you guys look out, 5, 10 years? What does this look like?
I think the entire agentic finance team, I think, is our vision. Can we actually help serve the enterprise companies that currently have hundreds of people in their finance team to operate at tens of people, if not less? And those folks will essentially be upskilled into system controllers. So instead of them logging into 15, 20 different platforms, they can kind of talk directly to Mesh or a host of Mesh agents to essentially do their work at a much more efficient scale.
Wow. So do you think in the future a startup today would hire their first finance person at a? Maybe they don't even hire that person. They just
Yeah,
use
exactly.
Mesh.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's not until they would probably hire their CFO, which is probably what Series B or C,
Yeah, at
that
least.
they'd even have like, and maybe the CFO is like a single finance and accounting person just using a platform like Mesh
Yeah.
below
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
below them. There is no employees like
exactly.
in accounting or finance. It's just agents
Yeah.
and
And
software.
and I think the critical unlock is like at the same time though, it's not like the CEO is blocked, right? I think like can we actually enable the same level of hyper growth without the human power currently needed to kind of support that?
So we back a lot of pre-seed and seed startups. We only invest post-launch, post-revenue typically. But for founders listening out there, that might be too early. When is it too early to use something like Mesh?
Probably when you only have one bank account and you don't really need to do any kind of fancy reconciliation, your sales volume is relatively low, or you're just starting out. I think, yeah, that's probably too early for us.
And then the inflection point there is why would you have multiple bank accounts?
Sometimes you're like inherently just multi-entity by structure. You're a European company and your parent co is Europe. European, but then you have a US entity. There's some like parent or rather payroll reconciliation that you might have to do.
So yeah, I mean, back to like, I love future questions. Like fast forward to, 2030, 2035. Do you think startups will still hire traditional finance teams, or AI be doing it all at that point? Or yeah, what's your
I
crystal
think
ball say?
I think AI is catching up, to be quite frank. Like, I think a lot of startups are actually struggling to hire someone in house, and therefore, like, you see an influx of outsourced accounting firms and outsourced
Mm.
bookkeeping firms. And the way that the trend is going, I think this is obviously kind of like over referenced trend at this point. But 75% of accountants are actually set to retire in the next 15 years. So that basically is going to trickle down to, of course, the accounting firms have to do a lot more client work, and that's one angle to kind of tackle this problem. The other angle is actually going straight to the companies that are going to continue to struggle to hire and retain this type of talent as the industry changes. So that's kind of the angle that we're going after.
So there's probably a lot of founders out there toying with an idea, kicking it around, starting to build, talk to users. Big constituent of my audience. Like, what's one piece of advice you'd give to those founders? Someone's a little bit further down the road.
I would say just start building and just kind of start like reducing the barrier to entry of sharing out your idea. I think a lot of times you're kind of stuck with, oh, I have to refine and perfect this product before I put anything out. And I think that's usually not the right way to go about things. So that's what I would recommend.
I love it. So let's wrap up with the rapid fire. What's the
So
most underrated challenge in building AI powered products?
I think the amount of memory and recall required and kind of like the training required to sustain that.
How do you solve that now? There's token limits, right? Which now Llama 4 just has like a 10 million limit I just heard about. And then you have reg and stuff like that. Reg's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
How do you get around those memory limitations now?
There is the manual way to do it, which is actually like writing it out by hand and like owning that prompt into your own code base. There's also interesting companies and startups actually like spinning up in that specific memory recall space. So we're looking at this company called Letta, Letta, that's kind of in that space and kind of innovating on that front. So yeah,
That's awesome. What's a finance tool you think is outdated and due for a complete overhaul?
there's a lot of it. I'd say Blackline. I think Blackline is kind of the conglomerate when it comes to reconciliation, and really from the reviews I read, they don't really do reconciliation. They're more of a workflow tooling.
What's one KPI you care most about at Mesh right now?
I think the number of transactions accurately reconciled is something that is top of mind for us right now.
Interesting. Yeah, you might call that like there's some F1 score there,
Yes.
right? Precision and recall, and you're kind of making sure. I mean, what is the right amount of accuracy? I mean, obviously you want to get 100%, but there's some sort of number of nines accuracy that you're going
Yeah.
to get to.
I
What's
believe
human
we're
level accuracy? It's got to be what,
probably
nine,
at best, hopefully.
right? Usually on benchmarks, AI benchmarks, I say it's usually 95%. Humans
Yeah.
do get it wrong, like 1 out of 20, 1 out of 30 times.
Yeah, especially, when there's, like, so many different data sources too at the same time.
Yeah.
I think 95 is a good place. I think we definitely wanna hit above that and get to 99, as fast as possible, especially with the number of training and the fast feedback loops that we can provide.
What's a favorite startup outside of Mesh that you think is tackling an interesting problem besides
There's
Letta?
so many. I would say one in my batch, A1 Base, I have to give a special shout out to. They're tackling maybe they're, like, ahead of the curve too, because they're almost, like, creating shovels for the gold rush and equivalent. They do identity management, so they're giving AI agents an identity through mail and through text and whatnot, and I think that's a really interesting angle.
That is interesting. If you had to pick, would you rather optimize for growth or profitability in the next 12 months?
I would say ideally both, but probably growth for now.
Probably growth right now, yeah. What's a habit or mindset shift that helped you most as a founder?
I think understanding what like today's focus is going to be. I think there's a ton of context switching that founders have to do, and it's kind of comes down to how can I limit this to get the most out of my brain, my own brain for the day. So
I love this. And that's something I struggle with as well with, 200 startups in my portfolio and so many things I could be doing. How do you kind of, focus on the right things at the right time with the right amount of effort and time before you context
yeah,
switch?
I would say batching, I think helps me a lot. So instead of like trying to like say, okay, I have to do marketing posts, I have to do a recruiting effort, and I also have to write a product spec. Instead of trying to do all three in a given day, maybe like doing more of the marketing content so that you can kind of have that content throughout the month or throughout the week. And then same thing with the product. Like for the next 2 days, I'm all going to be heads down on the product spec. But it doesn't work for everyone, so I think you kind of have to feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I do like to context switch because I just like to do something new. And then,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
but the batching definitely does help. Okay, I'm going to sit here and answer LinkedIn messages right now.
Yeah.
That's something I have to do like every day, like 20 or 30, Okay, let me go through my LinkedIn messages.
Totally.
Or yeah, let me go through portfolio updates, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
All the founder portfolio updates. And here I am on a Sunday afternoon, just batching those, just going through one by one, just like what's going on with each
Yeah.
startup.
You're
And
like your own AI agent in that moment.
yeah, I process everything with ChatGPT, but I need to wire that up,
Yeah.
properly. That's why I have all my founders send it to like portfolio at, you
Mhm.
know, teamignite.ventures. So
Yeah.
in the future, I'll grab all those emails, process them,
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's super smart.
automatically enter them into my Airtable. Right now, I just do that,
Mhm.
but I do use a prompt I've built up over time. But yeah, in the future, I'll hire somebody to do it and they'll figure it out. But
Yeah.
what's an AI use case in finance that people aren't talking enough about right now?
AI use case in finance. I think of the security aspect, actually. I think people are starting to talk about it, but something that we're even coming up with is like because we're inherently in the mesh layer, meaning we require a lot of credentials to your QuickBooks, your Plaid, and a lot of confidential data. Can you actually create a one password or password management system equivalent for AI agents to access? I think will be a really interesting thing.
Please copy and paste your text message code. We just text messaged you. It's like the bane of my existence. Everything
I know.
I'll log into now.
Yeah,
What's a popular business trend that you think is overhyped?
it's a really good question.
That would be more like a question for an exec, I think. Like at a Fortune 500 company, because they follow all the trends. They're like always like doing the buzzy word stuff. But maybe from a founder perspective, like what's a trend that you're like, that's overhyped?
I think, it's interesting how people have interpreted founder mode.
No, yeah,
I genuinely love founder mode. I genuinely I think that is the right it's not necessarily overhyped, but I think the way people have interpreted it varies a little bit, and,
yeah.
it really is, like, what works for you, and, like, the core sentiment is, like, it's your company, and you should run it the way
Yeah.
that feels most integrous to you, not necessarily, like
I think what it did is it just sparked this sort of like operator versus founder dichotomy, false
Mhm.
dichotomy, because there's lots of really amazing operators
Totally.
that never founded a company, so as far as I know, like Satya Nadella, right?
Yes, yeah.
An amazing leader, amazing operator, obviously. But yeah, I don't think he ever founded anything. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's been just at Microsoft for 30 years.
yeah.
And there's, lots of folks like that and I wrote a reaction piece to it called Leader Mode
Mm,
back, a year or two when this
I
article
like
came
that.
out from Paul Graham, which I love PG. He's amazing. But
Yeah, yeah.
I was I was like, it's more like leadership, I think is what you're getting at. Like being right a lot is what Jeff Bezos would say,
Mm,
like
yeah.
leaders are right a lot and founders are right a lot, like the
Mhm.
good founders. And yeah, it's tough. It's tough being a founder. What's the best advice you received from another YC founder or mentor?
Don't take every advice you get.
I love
Trust your gut.
that. And has there been any advice? Do you remember anything that you're like, not going to do that?
It's actually, kinda going back to what you, like, asked me in terms of, like, what's the most surprising thing about being a founder and being in YC. People are so generous with their advice, which is a good thing, but you also can't take every advice, it's conflicting oftentimes. So, coming back to, "Hey, like, what is my goal of the day, of the week, of the month for this company, and what pieces of advice am I gonna collect to essentially help me get there?" And then almost, like, silence out everything else. Saying no is actually harder than saying yes is kind of what I've learned.
Yeah, you have to say no to a lot of things. Where can folks interested find you online?
They can go to www.usemesh.com. We're also pretty active on LinkedIn, both my personal account, also a Mesh account, and as well as X. So, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. Thrilled to be on the journey with you, and thanks for coming on the pod.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.